So, this brings us to our next panel. Our next panel is about digital sovereignty, unleashing Europe's potential. And it's great to kick off this topic because we're going to be hearing more about it this afternoon when the German finance minister comes to deliver his political keynote. So let's get our feet wet in the topic of digital sovereignty. Please welcome our next panel. It is moderated by the head of trust and security at Bitkom, Rebecca Weiss, and her panel. Welcome. Thank you so much, Sarah, for the nice introduction, and welcome all to our next panel. And I've heard that at least some of you specifically made their way to the Hub Berlin today for our session, so thank you for that. It is definitely one of the most important topics that is going around in companies, in civil society, and in tech associations. So I'm very glad for my excellent panelists that are here with me today. I invite you to welcome with me Susan-Stefanie Breitkopf. She's member of the Executive Board and Chief Transformation Officer at Zeiss AG. Niklas Hellemann, he's the CEO of SoSafe. And Cecilia Bonefeld-Dahl, she's the Director General of Digital Europe and also advisor to the NATO and ENISA. So welcome. Thank you for being here with us today. When we talk about digital sovereignty, it is kind of an elusive concept. So what we are aiming to do today is to give you an overview of what are the most important pillars of the subject and to give you all some takeaways, what you all can do to strengthen digital sovereignty in a way that is like a progressive and open way to foster innovation in Europe while also protecting what needs to be protected. We'll be basically guided by the question, what does digital sovereignty mean for us and what does Europe and European companies do to foster innovation and the sovereign potential that we have? So maybe we'll start with a quick scale question. Susan, I would like to ask you, on a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate the digital sovereignty in Europe, and are there specific areas or technologies we should focus on and that you at Zeiss are focusing on already?
Yeah, thank you for this question. We are a global player, and we define digital sovereignty as a capability of self-determination. We would like to have a choice, a freedom of choice when it comes to partners, when it comes to techniques, and when it comes to tools. You might know that we are at the heart of the global digital transformation since we invented the EUV lithography, which makes it possible for us to have all these devices. And so restrictions when it comes to supply chains are not so very helpful, and restrictions when it comes to the movement of global talent are not so very helpful too. On the other hand, being a global player, it is very important to us to live up to our values. We are a foundation. Values are very important to us. So we need a kind of balance. We need a kind of balance when it comes to values on the one hand and regulation on the other hand. And we should not stifle innovation too much in Europe because this won't help us.
So what's your scale? I didn't hear it.
I think we can do better.
It could be better, so maybe a solid.
Should I mention hyperscalers based in Europe?
Well, yeah, I mean, taking especially that up, I would say, I would answer that with a quantitative answer. I would say we're at 3 maybe from 1 to 10. And if you look at those two topics you also discussed, so the separation of data flows or the separation of nationalization of data. This is something we always talk about. We talk about data protection, we talk about data flows. I think it's an important topic, but we focus on that. And then there's another topic, that's cybersecurity. That's the security posture of our ecosystem, of our companies. And that's driving my low quantification, because essentially we can talk about Schrems 2, we can talk about Privacy Shield. But if we don't increase our security posture in our companies, but also in the public sector, data will flow into unknown hands, not even states, and that's really the lever we need to pull, I think.
So, Niklas, you're basically saying sovereignty, if we only regulate it or come at it or look at it from a political side, it will never be enough because the practical issues need to be addressed as well. So a bottom-up approach. Okay, that's very interesting. So you're rating it a 3. Maybe, Cecilia, are you a bit more positive? How on a scale from 1 to 10 would you rate our sovereignty? And maybe you can also shed some light on the regulatory and political side as well for us. So what is happening in Europe? How are regulators trying to address the issue?
So first of all, the word sovereignty is, I'm glad that you say European sovereignty at least, but it is a concept that I would like to challenge at first. I would call it digital resilience. And we actually just published a paper on digital resilience, because sovereignty, of course, means the ability of choice. But whether that is national, EU, it is connected across private and public sector, and sometimes also across a group of bigger allies. Cybersecurity, I don't need to tell anybody here, for example, knows no borders. And our enemies are not like one state or one group. It's much more diverse than the old security concept. So I see it much more, we call it digital resilience. And we look at several things. We look at what are the skills that a society needs to be more resilient. There are actually critical skills that are needed to uphold both within the population, but also at a specialist level, that are not present in Europe, not only in Germany, Denmark, the other countries, but in Europe as such. And unfortunately, some of the other, I would say, rivalizing states, like for example China or others, have known this for years and have had digital skills strategy for the last 25 years. Another area is, of course, infrastructure. How do you communicate? Are you actually safe in the way that you communicate? Both, on a civil level, but also the Ukraine war. One of the first things they did was calling private sector and myself asking, can you help us? Our infrastructure is being disrupted and we don't know how to actually safely communicate. So the infrastructure is the third part. And then, of course, the cybersecurity, which is and must be a joint effort from private and public sector. There is no government that can basically address it. And we called for a private-public partnership on cybersecurity. And one of the responses from the European Union has been the Cyber Solidarity Act, looking for exactly creating a cyber reserve where there's a framework of private companies that can work seamlessly with, the European Union and the governments under attack. And so this is being settled at the moment. It's being discussed with the member states. Of course, now we are stuck in this, we have our digital sovereignty in Germany and Denmark and Sweden, But it's really, on the digital area, it's a very old-fashioned thinking because there is no government that can control this alone. And I would say not even the European governments. We carry the skills in tech, in private sector. We have, how are they going to find the resources? We have the majority of the tech savvies that is in cybersecurity and AI and quantum, etc. So it must be a collaboration. And I would say I give it a 5. But I think if we understand that, for example, something like public procurement has really brought down our resilience, considerable. We have our small islands of procurement, but in technologies, if you want to foster scale of resilience of technologies within your territory, which now is EU, you need public procurement of scale. You need to procure and let also smaller companies get into the procurement cycles and have the ability to scale with 50% of the budgets of the EU, which is public money. So that is one of our biggest challenges. How do we make sure that we align and that we let smaller companies come in and scale across Europe and grow big and increase our resilience on ground?
I think that's a very important aspect. So you're basically connecting the dots between the political side of things that is happening, but also an efficient, a modern procurement strategy that we need, and the will to build a new mindset basically for modern legislation and for modern strategic processes in businesses to work together within Europe. So sovereignty to me, what I've heard from you is basically the ability to be able to say yes and no to specific partners depending on your specific strategy. I think that's a very important point. And as you touched upon the skill side of things, I would like to focus on that a bit more because, Susan, I know that you are actively addressing the skills shortage or the worker shortage that definitely exists in Europe. Could you tell us a bit more about how you at Zeiss are doing that and are focusing on getting the right people into your company and working together with the right people externally?
Yeah, I think employees, skills, people are the most important things because in the end, innovation comes true to employees, to people doing these things. And being at the heart of digitalization, building the lithography, which makes it possible to have all these beautiful devices we like so very much, it is very important for us to see talent in every person. So what we are doing is, first of all, we try to be the best, most attractive employer we can be. And we work very hard for this every day because we are a very old company on the one hand. We are more than 175 years old. And on the other hand, we must invent us again and again and again. So this is very important. Make people count. We have a variety of tasks in our company. So we show appreciation to whatever is done, to maybe the more mundane stuff, which needs to happen on the one hand, and to, of course, our innovators, which are very important. What we are doing too is we try to skill up our people as fast as possible. We have an in-house academy where we go from C-level to all employees and shop floor. And I would like to point out two focus areas we work on. The one hand is, of course, digital and artificial intelligence. We want digital savviness, we want digital literacy when it comes to offense and defense. So we want our people to feel very strong about this. And on the other hand, we are talking culture, because working together, having those silos, not just in a company, but when it comes to nations too, broken up, this is a part of culture. And we foster a total different kind of culture now that we had at least more than 100 years ago. So it is about appreciation, it's about showing respect, it's about seeing talent in every person and build a kind of environment, because our deep belief is people are intrinsic motivated. Everybody of us wants to do his or her very best. And it is our task as an employer to build a surrounding, to create an atmosphere where people can live up to their expectations. And this is what we do as a company.
Yeah, that really sounds excellent. Especially the in-house academy seems to be a particularly good approach to work with the people you already got, to re-enable them to move around in the new environment, but also, of course, getting new talent on board. Because as you said, Zeiss is a very, I don't want to say old, but traditional company. You really are a legacy company, but that today isn't enough, you know. So
yes.
and what you're doing seems like a very progressive approach. It's amazing. Talking about skills, because Niklas, you are coming at the issue from the other side, basically, because what you are trying to do, or what your company actually does, is addressing the people on the ground for a bottom-up approach. Can you tell us a bit more about how that works? You're focusing on cybersecurity and digital skills as well, so.
Obviously, I love what you just said, Susan, talking about culture and like digital skills. And obviously, we are focusing more on those security literacy, essentially. So really making every single person in a company part of the active defense of the company. And if we look back 10 years ago, maybe if I'm super critical, the main perspective was, the problem sits in front of the computer. And that's obviously something nobody wants to be approached, like a liability, right? So what we are doing is really helping our customers creating the security culture. And matter of fact, in our latest report, our human risk review, we asked security professionals, we do that every year. And they told us, like 99% of them told us that establishing security culture, a sustainable security culture, is top of their mind. So it's not about, switching that problem in front of the computer off. but increasing digital literacy, security literacy, but then also helping people to develop secure habits. Because teaching something, and we know that from psychology, I'm a psychologist, that you can tell people something, you can teach people something, but eventually you want to help them act in a certain way, right? When there's a phishing email coming in, when there is, something weird going on in the computer, report it and be part of the active defense. And for that, you need to work with the people, strengthen the skills, but also motivate them and explain them why this is important and why this also, essentially protects their jobs. So I like it.
And why would you say is particularly the cybersecurity angle of things so important for the sovereignty debate?
If we look at how most attacks, and if we just focus on cybercrime, in the press, there's usually those very, very spectacular cases that might be state-funded. Last night we heard that a big German party was hacked or infiltrated by some state, but the vast majority of cybercrime is commercial. And usually these commercial gangs, and it's organized crime all around the world, that are sometimes hopping on the bandwagon in terms of crises, but usually they are just commercially driven. And they focus on efficiency. So they want to get into companies, they want to encrypt data, they want to blackmail companies, and coming into systems of a company usually is the most efficient way is via the people. So 9 out of 10, that's also what the BSI tells us, 9 out of 10 of the attacks involve some form of the human layer. And so it just makes a lot of sense to focus on the human layer and to help people to be better and come out of this liability position to be really active. And for example, maybe if they click on a phishing email and they realize it, report it afterwards. And we have many cases like that where, and Reddit would be one example, the major forum, where an employee clicked on a phishing email, realized it, then reported it, and they could contain it actually.
Okay. Yeah, so... But that kind of opens the discussion about the geopolitical side of things as well. Maybe, Cecilia, as your members are active across Europe, you do and see and hear a lot. So maybe can you talk us through what we can learn from what other companies or other countries are doing? That will be one aspect. And how is the digital sovereignty debate actually woven into the geopolitical carpet?
Well, it's basically at the heart of it, isn't it? Since the Ukrainian war, it's been very, very clear that as a part of a resilience of a country is the private sector. Ukraine was, many of the big, for example, hyperscalers, they held all the public data in their cloud solutions. And there is a reason why the society in Ukraine is relatively untouched and actually well-functioning during a war, because they were able to move the public data out immediately of the country. And they had a private sector who basically stepped in and became the cyber defense of Ukraine. And they had a platform, DIA, where they are able to, the citizens are able to use it for security, taking pictures of tanks or flights coming in and warning each other. So they have really their digital resilience through partnerships with private sector and through their own society. Remember, Ukraine has been kind of the coding factory of the Nordics. Every digital company in the Nordics would have like a few guys coding for them in Ukraine. So they have been one of the nations that really nurtures these resilience skills up front in their own population. And this is what the ordinary, I would say, every government of a country needs to learn from. What are the skills to build in your society to be resilient? Second of all, I would say the geopolitical, all of a sudden, is about sovereignty. Normally, sovereignty has been a concept for nation states. Now we are here with a topic that is not a nation state topic. This could be an EU, I would say EU plus allies, and you don't get that resilience or sovereignty without very strong partnerships. So all of a sudden we have a discussion like, do we need our own cloud solutions in Europe? And I'm like, well, that's maybe not the time to just discuss with our biggest ally whether, their fantastic technologies are welcome here or not. So these kind of and we see that also falling down to the EUCS, ENISA schemes, should we carve them out in some of the markets, right? Right now, the honest truth is that we need the best technologies to protect our assets. We cannot afford trying to play that game. EU is the the master of 5G, 6G. US is right now the master of cloud, and it will change over time. But we need to make sure to have the right allies, which we of course do in NATO. And then we also need to look at ourselves as a society saying, how come Europe only has 3% of the digital unicorns? How come? Because what do you need as a unicorn in digital? You need scale, you need a single market, and you need speed. And we have none of the above, right, in Europe. So how can governments really work together, looking at all their public funding, looking at creating incentives instead of always thinking about protection? How can we enable citizens? How can we enable innovation? Because there's no doubt that the future belongs to the one who has technological, superior of the others. And if we want to jump back on that, we cannot think small. We need to think big. And we need to enable companies to grow big. And one good example has been, for example, the UK. UK around 15 years ago created a quota for SMEs in their public procurement, meaning that 25% of the funding needs to go directly to SMEs, not through a consortium, but directly to SMEs. They have like 3 times as many unicorns as the whole of EU together now. Unfortunately, they left us, right? So, but there are concrete tools that governments can use to enable companies to grow. We see now a lot of regulation, a lot of fragmentation, a lot of, even I think in Germany you have 16 different bodies implementing GDPR. I mean, as an SME, do I hire a lawyer or do I hire 2 coders, right? If you're a company in digital, you need to hire coders, not lawyers, right? So we really need to also look at ourselves and stop thinking that we only need to do protection, because in the end, we cannot protect the citizens if they don't know how to protect themselves. So we need to give them the right skills and abilities to do so.
I think that's also a very excellent point. So it's not about balancing protection, security, and innovation, but it all depends on each other, basically, especially in the context of sovereignty. But talking about skills again and learning how to protect yourself, maybe back to you, Niklas. Have you noticed any shift of awareness of the topic, and how do people react? If you go to a company and tell them, yeah, I would like to train you in cybersecurity skills, how do they react?
I mean, our company is 5 years old. And 5 years ago, I needed to explain to certain people and CIOs in companies that actually phishing or ransomware could be a problem. They told me, currently not. And we already knew back then it was a problem. I think since 2015, when we had the first substantial rise of cryptocurrencies, we saw a huge surge in cybercrime, because now it is a business model, and that is driving also the awareness amongst decision makers, amongst management, because it has become very, very, very costly. In our report, we asked the security professionals, and they tell us that 50% of all companies in Germany and in Europe actually have been successfully hacked in the last 36 months. Many of them twice. So, that's a huge driver creating awareness that it is in fact very costly. Then there's also some some policy making. We see NIS2 that is debated in a very hot manner. But I think it's a good direction, because it really makes eventually the topic, hard codes it into processes and governance of companies and makes them move. And if you talk about the awareness of the individual people, then obviously, show me the person that didn't have any specific case in their wider network of relations, or was hit by themselves, either private or within the company. It's just a very, very frequent thing that currently happens, that people get hacked, that people get blackmailed, that your parents receive some weird scam SMS. That's a very recent thing we saw. And then there's very, very a huge number of companies that are successfully hacked and then offline. Look at large companies like Uber, look at Rockstar Games, look at Cisco. These are all very, very well protected companies. And these 3 companies, they all got hacked by 17-year-olds from the UK and Brazil. So I think eventually there will be a lot of awareness, but it will be costly if we wait too long. So, we are in the business of prevention. And the prevention business case is always the better business case. than incident response or everything that happens after. Although that is also super important because a lot of cybersecurity investments go into containment because eventually you will get hacked, you will be targeted. The question is, will you have digital resilience within your company that then essentially helps you to contain the blast radius, right?
Containing the blast radius, that's a good visual. Seeing as you just said, you were founded like 5 years ago, and Cecilia stressed the point that we need more public-private partnerships and partnerships within the industry, more cooperation between traditional companies and startups. How would you rate the innovation potential for startups? Is enough being done to foster the environment, or what could be better?
I mean, a lot of the discussion usually focus on public funding for startups. I think actually we're not doing so bad there. I mean, we also have been recipients of a German grant, the Exist grant, in our very, very first period of 3 people. Now we are 350 people. I think that there's a lot that's currently already being done. Cecilia mentioned it. The 2 factors that are making international expansion or creating unicorn in Europe very, very complex is a very fragmented legislation, and that's commercial law and that's labor law. I mean, I'm not going to ask for the harmonization of labor law, but this could be really a game changer for us. I mean, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of resources within our company that go into hiring talent from Lisbon, hiring talent from other places, but there's a lot of legal paperwork involved.
Okay, yeah. I guess, so we could do better, but it's not as bad as it's sometimes made out to be.
It's exactly
I'm trying to get some positive messages across.
Yeah.
So it could be better.
It's
but
very
it's
positive
not all
that
bad.
we're discussing it here today,
Yes.
right? I mean, but we also need to get to the solutions. So we have a problem. We are not digital resilient enough. We don't collaborate across private and public sector enough. We don't have the talent because the educational system has not been up to speed. And we think like in Bundesländer or even in Kommune, in small municipalities, instead of thinking about what do we need to have a resilient society. So I think we also need to get to the point of saying, how do we collaborate better between private and public sector concretely, which is the Cyber Solidarity Act, amongst others, on EU level, trying to do this. How do we make sure that universities, Digital Europe is now trying to set up 10 cyber campuses using the French model, where they have done this, basically to offer both to companies and to public sector teaching of specialists and even to school teachers how you can use cybersecurity in your teaching, right? So we need to get to the point where we say, we have a problem, here's the solution, instead of keep on talking and say, it's difficult, it's difficult, it's difficult. Yeah, it's difficult, but the problem, I can tell you, I was working in Denmark, I used to be the president of the Danish Association, and I took over and found out that 50% of our resources went to trying to influence the educational ministers over time and time and time on actually getting digital skills in school. And I said, did we get any results? They said, no. I said, okay, let's cancel it. Apparently, we're not very good at it. And of course, then they woke up. They found 2 million euros. They funded a big program for coding classes. And now it's in 10,000 schools all around Denmark, basically offering 2 years of computational thinking and coding and cybersecurity on the school. But why does it have to come from private sector? So let's look at these initiatives and actually get it done. Prioritize some of these areas that should have been solved 20 years ago and stop this. It's hard, right? So at a certain point, we also need to, how do we change the procurement system? How do we change the educational system? And how do we make sure that resources, right now, let's say you're Ukrainian, you come into the EU, you are hired there, you can't even move to Germany. You need to go back to Ukraine to actually apply to go to Germany. So how do we make sure that we attract some of these resources? We have, chips manufacturing, right? Totally difficult to get. Taiwan has all of them. Why don't we give them a free pass? If you look at Ukraine, they have the cyber security resources. So we need to also to be smart and make sure that EU has these mechanisms to foster the environment.
And I couldn't agree more
So
because
we need a strategic approach. Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you, seeing that we're running out of time already. But Maybe Susan, could you tell us if you want to address everybody here in the room who's in a company as well, who's dealing with these issues, has to navigate the geopolitical mess sometimes. What should companies bear in mind? What do they really have to do to improve and secure their own digital sovereignty as a company? So from your strategic experience.
Yeah, from my experience, and I've been there where Cecilia has been, it's in the end, it's about people. It's about people, what they are doing together, and it's about the skills of their people. Because people are creating this kind of innovation, and people make the innovation real. And we've been there. We've been grown with, we've been 20,000 employees more than we have been 6 years ago when your company was founded. So when it comes to digital sovereignty, I think companies should invest in their people, make them as digital savvy as possible, have a kind of very strong digital literacy. And I believe in innovation, of course, because innovation it sustains digital sovereignty. Digital innovation lies in user experience, it lies in the ecosystems we are building and in the processes too. So make cybersecurity, make innovation, make data literacy as user-friendly as however possible. And I would like to point this out, connect, come to events like these, talk to each other, see the different approaches you need to see, share good and best practices, and to be very honest, share failures too, of course, because we can learn from our failures and we need to talk about them. And finally, be curious. I think there's so much out there to learn and to gain, and people will give us their power to do this. So this will help us with digital sovereignty.
And just a little bit of, ending on a happy note, there is a big initiative of building these cyber academies, and we are heavily involved in it, reaching out to the countries, and of course also Bitkom for, a partnership. And there is the Cyber Solidarity Act, looking at how private and public sector can work together on cyber. There is the new SOX initiative on how we can work together in these. And I would say NATO has an excellent program called Diana, which of course I need to say is excellent because I wrote some of it, but where you can actually have an accelerator of accepting SMEs into programs to contract with NATO, which gives them access to the whole community, but become trusted vendors and develop these disruptive technologies for a security purpose with the NATO. Even dual-use technology is not necessarily what we think about NATO typically. So these type of programs are out there, and but they also need a member state push to say, yes, let's get out of our national cocoons and step into a larger scale of how we collaborate.
I think that's a good closing sentence. So, dear audience, if you want to take one thing away from our discussion, I think it's digital sovereignty doesn't mean closing off our borders or closing off our systems entirely, but focusing on the skills of the people that we have and focusing on the partnerships that we can build within Europe and, of course, with our partners across the globe. I hope you'll be continuing the discussion. I mean, digital sovereignty is definitely one of the most important topics there is. I thank you, Cecilia, Niklas, Susan, for being with us today. Thank you all for listening. And you'll be in the Speaker's Corner for a while, so if you have any questions, feel free. Bye.